Recently, local government debt has become a central focus in China's economic stimulus packages.
财政部已经安排了1.2万亿元的
Since the start of 2024, the Ministry of Finance has set a debt ceiling of 1.2 trillion yuan, or $168 billion, to tackle this pressing issue. Meanwhile, infrastructure investments have been partly suspended in 12 provincial regions and municipalities grappling with significant debt burdens. What factors have contributed to this debt problem? How severe are these challenges for China's overall economy? And perhaps most importantly, how will these debt-laden regions pivot toward alternative economic drivers to reduce their reliance on infrastructure spending? In today's episode, my colleague Guo Yan joins us to explore the debt issues facing local governments in China and how they are navigating this financial landscape. It's Thursday, October the 17th. So China has put a hold on the treasury bonds in a dozen of provincial and municipal governments. And Guo Yan, why have local treasury bonds become one of the top priorities on China's reform agenda?
Well, local government debt has become a hot topic in China's reform agenda because it affects not just the economy, but also people's livelihood here. For years, local governments have borrowed heavily to build public infrastructure and provide public services. A lot of modern infrastructure such as roads, bridges, schools, and high-rise skyscrapers are all supported by the local government. And these are the things we rely on, of course. But as the debt grows, some cities and provinces are starting to struggle to pay them back. And this could lead to financial troubles that could impact public services in the future. And to avoid this, the central government is now focusing on smarter debt management to keep local governments from falling into dangerous debt traps.
And this local treasury bond only took shape in China in 2011 when this model was piloted in two provinces, Zhejiang and Guangdong, and also Shanghai and Shenzhen. And it was only later this model was promoted to more governments in China. And during this period, would you say that these benefits that you brought up, skyscrapers, roads, these infrastructure services, would you say these benefits were a main reason that led to the expansion of this system to around the country?
I mean, the local government debt actually contributed to China's economic growth for many years. Since 1994, China started to adopt the so-called tax sharing policy, where the local governments should submit over half of their local tax revenues to the central government, and then they rely on the transfers, the payment transfers from the center to support their local economic growth. And as you have mentioned, many regions in China, they have been relying on the debts, a huge amount of debts to support economic growth, especially the rich regions in China. Local government debt has actually played a huge role in China's rise as the world's second largest economy.
Okay.
And borrowing money has allowed these cities, regions, and provinces to build modern infrastructure. For instance, the iconic bullet trains and the high-rise buildings are all supported by the funding that borrowed by the local governments. I would like to take Guangdong province, for example. This province has one of the highest debt levels in China. But at the same time, it ranked as one of the top regions in China that boasts the highest level of GDP in China, gross domestic product. It has one of the highest debt levels in China, but it used that debt to fuel its incredible economic growth. And this model has helped China urbanize quickly. But now, some regions are realizing they need to better manage the risk before the debt piles up too high.
So this model of releasing treasury bonds to attract investment has witnessed the development in many regions. And when and how did this model start to expose problems like the ones you brought up to avoid local debts from collapsing?
Well, the public started to realize the risks, the hidden risks of this amount of debts in many years ago when the property market started to slow down in China. I've mentioned that the local government rely on borrowing and the land sales to increase their revenue for many years. But now as the property market, China's housing market started to slow down, they could hardly rely on that method in the future. And then how could the local government get the money? They would resort to various so-called financial tools to increase the revenue of the local government. But the problem is that if they use these financial tools, and many financial tools are actually off the book, financial tools, apart from the banking system, of course. And if a local government has too much debt, it could struggle to fund essential services in the future, like healthcare, education, and infrastructure maintenance for local people. And this is just one risk. And another big risk here is that heavy risk loans could slow down future economic growth, which is vital to local development, especially if local governments have to cut back on spending to manage repayments. And then, like I've mentioned, is financial crisis. The local government, many Chinese banks lend money to local governments. Of course, compared to individuals and companies, the governments have stronger credibility behind. And then the financial institutions, the banks would more likely to trust this government. But what if this government can hardly repay their borrowing for the bank? If these risks add up, that would cause huge risk facing the banking system. And if all these risks add up, that would finally put a dent to public confidence. Public confidence is very important to support the credibility of the government and also the market. For instance, we have seen various stalled projects, public projects in some provinces in southwest China, and public service cuts. And people may start questioning local government's ability to manage money wisely, and this will finally lead to social tensions.
Just like you said, taking the province of Guangdong as an example, as one of the most economically developed provinces in China. At the same time, it also has one of the largest debts. So will there be a regional difference between a developed one like Guangdong and some other underdeveloped regions?
Yes, they are actually richer provinces like those along the east coast, such as Guangdong, which is a coastal province. They are better positioned to manage their debt because they attract more investment and generate more economic revenue. And on the other hand, some poor regions like Guizhou, which is located in southwestern China, have taken on massive debts despite having much smaller economies. There are significant differences in debt risk across various regions in China. Take Guangdong, our previous example. Although the province has high debt levels, its debt ratio is pretty low. Debt ratio refers to the proportion of the debts, the amount of debts, and the region's GDP growth.
Okay, so how much money you can make versus how much money you owe.
Right. And this ratio is critical when we talk about the ability of a local government to repay their borrowing. Guangdong consistently ranks among the top in GDP across China, making it easier for the province to secure funding. On the contrary, Guizhou's small county of Dushan, this small county, even it is among the poorest counties in China. It borrows a mind-boggling sum of money years ago for local infrastructure. This small county racked up 40 billion yuan in debt, or $5 billion US dollars, even though its yearly revenue was only 1 billion yuan.
Okay.
And which means that it's almost impossible for this small county to repay all this debt. And this shows how risky debt can become, especially in less developed areas in China. And it's important to understand that wealthier regions like those in the east have the resources to manage their debt more safely. They borrow more, but they also have the tools to keep things under control. In contrast, poor regions face a more difficult challenge. Their lower income means they can't borrow as much. But even small debt can become a big issue if the economy slows down or if they don't have the right system in place to manage it. And one thing I think we have to notice is that there is an uneven landscape in terms of debt and economic growth in China. Actually, the Chinese government, the central government, has already noticed this uneven risk facing different regions, and it is actually paying close attention to how different regions handle their borrowing. It's about making sure that growth continues without putting too much strain on the local governments, especially in the less developed areas.
Okay, so now that the central government is more aware of this problem, how does China plan to curtail the risks of these local treasury bonds?
Well, the Chinese government is actively working to prevent local government debt from getting out of hand. And recently, the Chinese finance minister has announced a basket of effective financial measures to help the local governments dissolve their debts and help to ensure the health of local governments' economic growth in the future. The central government is helping local governments to resolve hidden debts, and this gives local governments more financial flexibility so they can focus on promoting economic development and ensuring public services. And also, special bonds will be issued to boost the core capital of large state-owned banks. And this will make these banks stronger, allowing them to better manage risk and provide more loans to support real economy, especially for the local regions. And also, local governments will use a combination of special bonds, targeted bond funds, and tax policies to prevent the property market from further declining and to help recover in the future.
Okay, so there are risks to keep an eye on, but at the same time, let's also remember that the investments that came with releasing these bonds really did contribute to the economic development in many regions across China. And now this model is being suspended in some provinces and municipalities and also slowing down in some other regions. Will these places find other replacements to develop their economy?
Well, local governments are now looking at new ways to keep their economies growing without piling on debt. And some of the strategies they're considering include, for instance, tax reforms. By improving tax collection and introducing new taxes like environmental taxes, local governments can boost their revenues without relying on borrowing anymore. But that's still, we have to see what the outcome would be, because it's just, I think it's just a beginning. And also, many regions have started to develop new industries. They are supporting high-tech industries like artificial intelligence, green energy, and biotech could help local economies grow and create new job opportunities. And at the same time, many governments are encouraged to attract private investment. And local governments can still fund big projects by attracting private investors sharing the cost of the development. And also, by improving things like transportation and public services, cities and provinces can become more attractive to business and residents, and then boosting the economy without taking on more debt.
Okay. Thank you very much for speaking with us, Guo Yan.
Thanks for having me.
In the first 8 months of this year, electric car production in Chongqing surged by over 150% compared to last year. Major players in the EV sector, including Chang'an, Geely, Seres, and FinDreams Battery, have poured resources into manufacturing and R&D, propelling Chongqing to become the 5th largest EV production hub in China. Close behind is Guangxi, which produced more than 300,000 electric vehicles during the same period. And notably, both Chongqing and Guangxi are among the 12 provincial regions and municipalities that have partly suspended infrastructure investments due to high debt burdens. In response to similar fiscal challenges, many other debt-ridden regions have also shifted their focus, identifying new economic drivers to stimulate their local economies. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platforms. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yunqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Guo Yan. I'll see you in the next one.